So we have been talking about rest the last few weeks here, and I want to wrap that topic up today. And next Sunday, we have the joy of having one of our Vanguard students with us. And so Ethan Findley is his name. He's going to share the Word of God. It's going to be great. So today I'm going to talk about replenishing well. I want to read a story to you. How many of you are familiar with a singer named Annie Chapman? Anybody? Okay, so this is a story by Annie Chapman. So this is what she writes. All alone, she sat in the back of the church. The rest of the 500 women at the women's conference that weekend had already exited the auditorium. I was gathering up my books, papers, and props when I saw her at the back of the room. And I walked over to where she was sitting. Her head was bowed low, and her shoulders were drooping. I sat down, and she began to tell me her story. She was a mother of 3. Her oldest son, suffering from muscular dystrophy, had been confined to a wheelchair for the most of his 17 years. Her other 2 children had a variety of learning and emotional challenges. With her head still bent, she whispered, "I'm married to a mean, hateful man who makes my life miserable. He won't help me with our son. He even refuses to help me hold him while he goes to the bathroom. I buried my father this week," the woman continued. "At the funeral, I learned that my father had disinherited me from his estate because he hated my husband. Then she told me something that still haunts me. I came to this weekend with one prayer," she said. "I asked God to kill my husband. I prayed, Lord, I need a way out. I feel like a bird in a cage." Finally, she lifted her eyes and said, "When I prayed that prayer, God spoke to me as clearly as I've ever sensed his voice. And he said, 'Even a bird in a cage sings.'" With tears running down her face, she asked, "What am I supposed to do with that? How do I live with that answer?" Feeling utterly clueless about what to say, I replied, "If God says sing, you need to find your song." I don't know what life has thrown your way in the last while, but my hope is that this summer you will find your song again. All kinds of things come into our lives that upset us and upset the apple cart, cause us to feel disoriented, cause us to feel like we don't really know what to think or say or do. But my prayer is that this summer you will be able to slow down enough, hear God's voice, and find your song again. So let's look together at what God might have to say about this. And I actually want to go back to a book in the first 2/3 of the Bible called the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah. Now, the reason I love Isaiah is because I love Jesus, and Jesus loved Isaiah. And if he loved Isaiah, then I love it too. So I want to look at Isaiah chapter 40, starting in verse 27. Here we go. "O Jacob, how can you say the Lord does not see your troubles? O Israel, how can you say God ignores your rights? Have you never heard? Have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure the depth of his understanding. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. I love those words. There are times in my life where I felt like I just could not go on. And I found strength in those words, that waiting on Him, trusting Him for strength could make a difference. It could lift me to a new level of ability to move on. Now, this passage was written to the Jewish people several hundreds of years before Jesus lived. But it was predicting a time when the Jews wouldn't have to work frenetically to earn their way to God through sacrifices and all kinds of rule-following rituals, where they would be able to fly with God, so to speak. When he says he lifts them up like wings of the eagle, he's really talking about a time when they would have the ability from within themselves to be good without this irk to it, this sense of having to push themselves beyond what their normal capacity was. He's talking about a time when he would give them forgiveness and peace without sacrifices, where the sacrifice would be done for them, and they could receive forgiveness and grace and mercy for free. It was a wonderful prophetic prediction. And I imagine that if Isaiah was writing this today to you and me, he might say something like, if you can just settle down, if you can just be still for a minute, listen to God, He will fill your heart with love, with joy, with peace, with grace, and you won't have to chase after those things with artificial means like substances or success or friends or family or anything like that. That relentless obsession with finding that will be over. You will find rest. Some of you are probably one step ahead of me right now, and you're realizing, but Dallas, you're talking about emotional stuff. And the truth is, emotional stuff, our emotional well-being and our spiritual well-being are intricately linked with each other. When you feel well, your spirit is usually the cause of that. When we are spiritually in tune with God, emotionally, often things begin to fall into place. Doesn't mean that everything instantly is fine, but things begin to align when we align ourselves with God. So when we are struggling to learn to trust God, it's usually because we are struggling with old ways of coping with our emotional distress. Things that don't really work for us. And negative emotions cause us to find coping mechanisms that don't really work well. Now, you and I live in a culture that basically has this idea that more is better. More money is better, more friends is better, more likes is better, more followers are better, more, shares are better. All of these things, the more is better. And so we tend to approach our emotional distress the same way. If I'm feeling distressed in a certain area, I go looking for something to add to my life to fill that hole. And so I have this sense of more is better, so I need more in my life. And so we keep piling on more and more things on our lives. Maybe it's more medications, maybe it's more habits, maybe it's more this, maybe it's more that we keep adding to our lives in order to do better in life. I submit to you that actually we need to do the exact opposite. The best thing we can do is actually take away from our lives. When you're feeling emotional distress, it's actually usually because we are struggling to let go of something that we need to let go of. We are actually needing to release something, not take on something more. See, it's a little bit like somebody running a marathon, the way we live our lives. And when you start to feel tired when you're running a marathon, the best thing you can do is not say, I need more of something. I need to pack more water with me, or I need to pack more energy drinks, or more food. Imagine somebody who's running a marathon with a backpack on, and every mile they put more stuff into their backpack. It's not going to work out very well. But that's the way we live our lives in our culture. Very often we're packing more and more stuff, more and more habit patterns, more and more things as we go, and our load gets heavier and heavier and more difficult to do. And Jesus actually calls us to do the exact opposite. He calls us to let go of things, to take things out of our backpack. And He wants us to be able to run free. So when we start feeling those difficult emotions like anger and sadness, or insecurity or stress, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that I'm hanging on to that God might be saying it's time to let go of? Sometimes it's difficult for us to figure out what that might be because we've been carrying those things sometimes for years and years and years, and we become so used to carrying them that we don't even recognize that we are carrying them anymore. And that's one of the reasons why I believe church is important, because a church family can help us identify some of those things that we are carrying that we really don't need to carry. Sometimes when we gather in our smaller groupings, we can have good, honest conversations with people, and that can be eye-opening to us so we can see, wow, maybe this is really not something God wants me to carry. And somebody else's experience can help us see our own experience through new light. And we can see, wow, I need to let that go. So as we head into summer, maybe this summer could be a time for us to slow down and ask God to show us, are there things you want me to let go of this summer that I don't need to carry anymore? Things that could really replenish my soul if I didn't have to be holding on to them anymore. So let's just be honest here. Some of the difficult emotions we feel, actually probably many of the difficult emotions we feel, come from our relationships. People that we're close to, or used to be close to, cause us to feel angst, or anger or bitterness or all kinds of emotions that we struggle with. And relationships cause tension within us. As much as we want to see our relationships as wonderful and healthy and rejuvenating, the truth is, sometimes they really aren't. I was shocked a few years ago when I read that October is the month of the year when most divorces happen. Why October? Well, actually, the reason it's October is because when people go away on holidays in the summertime, the tension rises because they're together 24/7. By the time they get home from holidays, they're so mad at each other that they decide to split, and usually it takes until October for them to actually file for divorce. It's an annual cycle. So as much as we want to believe that holiday time is going to be a wonderful time of love and joy and having good times together, for a lot of people, that is not the case. For a lot of people, summertime can just accentuate the relationship difficulties that they're having in their lives. So what did Jesus have to say about this whole relational tension stuff? I want to look at one little section of a sermon that Jesus preached when he was here on earth. Matthew, and it's from Matthew chapter 7. Matthew is the very first book of the New Testament. He was first-hand eyewitness to this, so it's not second-hand information. He wrote what he heard Jesus say. So let's go to Matthew chapter 7, first 5 or 6 verses. We got it there? There we go. Don't judge others, and you will not be judged. For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye, when you can't see past the log in your own? Hypocrite! First get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. So what's Jesus really talking about here? Well, if we were to summarize the essence of what he's saying here, he's saying we need to worry far less about pointing the finger at somebody else and a little bit more about looking at our own hearts. That's really the essence of what he's saying. The truth is, focusing on other people's weaknesses is very toxic to us. And we need to avoid doing that. And the truth is, I'm just going to say it straight out, we need to avoid people who do that. If you are rubbing shoulders with people who are always criticizing other people, and they might do it in sophisticated ways, but whatever way it is, you need to know that's toxic. And you need to avoid that. You need to let those people just do their thing from a distance and not let it rub off on you. So Jesus is very clear. We need to be far less concerned about what other people are doing wrong and allow God to just work on softening our own hearts. This is from a book called The Anatomy of Peace. I like this. It says, although nothing I can do in the present can take away the mistreatment of the past, the way I carry myself in the present determines how I carry forward the memories of those mistreatments. When I see others as objects, I dwell on the injustices I have suffered in order to justify myself, keeping my mistreatments and suffering alive within me. When I see others as people, on the other hand, then I free myself from the need to focus unduly on the worst that has been done to me, and I'm free to leave the worst behind me and to see not only the bad, but the mixed and the good in others as well. But none of that is possible if my heart is at war. A heart at war needs enemies to justify its warring. It needs enemies and mistreatment more than it wants peace. Let me read that last sentence again. A heart at war needs enemies to justify its warring. It needs enemies and mistreatment more than it wants peace. When my heart is all torn up, I gravitate towards people who mistreat me and all kinds of injustices around me, because I need to have something to latch onto to justify the turmoil within myself.